would you ever use your car insurance to pay for gas or to pay for tire rotations? And they laugh, and go, hey, that's kind of a dumb question. Of course, the answer is no. Found there was an appetite for that information, more so than I even suspected.
Like, the answers are so dense that they almost make the understanding of it harder to obtain.
They're incredulous about who's actually advising them and why. There's also a misconception, Donovan, that to lower costs, you have to make the plan worse, or you have to impede care or disrupt access, and that's absolutely the opposite of the truth.
Welcome to POSIWID. The Business of Benefits is your no BS, no sales guide to real solutions.
No gimmicks, just the truth about how to take control, transform your benefits, and care for your most valuable asset, your people.
If you're tired of the same old sales pitch and you're ready to rethink your benefits, this podcast is for you. The truth is out there. Are you ready to hear it?
All right, everybody, welcome back to the Business of Benefits. I'm Donovan Reiches, CEO of Ethos Benefits. Today we had on Spencer Smith, who is the SVP of Sales at Pareto Health, a captive, but he's also the host of Self-Funded with Spencer. So if you've been in the industry or been curious about healthcare strategy for a while, I'm sure you probably heard from him. We covered a wide range of topics. I really enjoyed this conversation. I hope you guys do as well. Let's get into it. All right. Today we have Spencer Smith. I've known Spencer for a little while. I've been listening to him online even longer. Of course, the host of the Spencer Smith podcast. But before that, you're kind of doing YouTube videos, anyway, for the industry, right?
Yeah, it's 5 years ago now. I made my first piece of content for LinkedIn on whiteboarding stop loss, of all things. That's where I got the start, got the idea, and found there was an appetite, Donovan, for that information, more so than I even suspected when I started. And it's led me down this path now of all the stuff that I'm doing as a result.
Cool. Well, tell us a little bit about your background in the industry. I know you've held a couple different roles. You obviously do a lot of education stuff. You do a lot of the conferences. So you're keeping up with all the innovations and changes in the industry. So tell me about your kind of starting point, your path.
Yeah, well, it's funny. I'll start right now because I think it's interesting. 17, 18 years almost into this career, I feel like I know less about the industry now than I ever did because I get exposed to more. And you realize, man, like once you start turning over stones, you just realize like how many stones are out there. But I started as an analyst at a company called Benefit Mall, and I was there for 6 years, I think. And I've always been somewhat analytical in nature. And it wasn't until I moved to the broker side as an analyst that I realized, hey, there's this thing out there called self-funding that's kind of interesting. And most big employers do it. And that's when Pandora's box opened up for me. But over the last decade or so, I've been in the world of what we call stop loss insurance, which is the type of insurance that you know. But if the audience doesn't know, it's what a self-funded employer purchases on the backside to ensure big risk. Large unexpected risk that hits the plan. They have protection on that. And then my current job is SVP of Sales for Pareto Health. And we'll explain what a benefits captive is, I'm sure, at some point. But we are the largest benefits captives in the space.
So as a good conversation or knowledge base, like I always find different consultants, different people in the industry kind of explain this differently. And I always say, like, the term self-funded is created by the insurance companies to scare the crap out of you and just sound terrible. Fully insured seems like a warm blanket. Self-funded, you're out on the streets. And I know, we know through experience it couldn't be more different. You always have insurance. You're choosing that level of insurance. Usually, if it's your first year, you're choosing more insurance than you had prior, fully funded. But how do you explain that when you're starting a conversation with an employer, the difference between fully funded, self-funded, and kind of mitigating those concerns and realizing, getting them to understand you can design around them?
Yeah, there's a couple ways you can explain it. I think the best way is an analogy, Donovan, and you probably use this analogy sometimes, but we'll ask employers who are fully insured today, would you ever use your car insurance to pay for gas or to pay for tire rotations? And they laugh, and go, hey, that's kind of a dumb question. Of course, the answer is no. But I think the same idea holds true in health insurance. It doesn't seem most efficient, right, to use your health insurance to pay for labs or x-rays or things that you can pay for in cash very easily. And if your plan covers all these little small things and insures them, what do you think is going to happen to the premium as a result? what would happen to your car insurance premium if it covered tire rotations and gas and oil changes? It would probably triple or quadruple. And so when you get that basic understanding of I'm kind of over insuring my plan as an employer, maybe there's another way to do that. And the other way to do it is this thing we called self-insurance, which now lets them pick the level of insurance they want to purchase. And then they use their own P&L, their own cash to pay for the things that they can afford to pay for. It just becomes a much more efficient equation as a result. And I like to think of it, and do you ever explain it, Donovan, as guaranteed cost versus variable costs, right? So if I am fully insured as an employer, it's all premium. No matter what the outcomes are, good or bad in terms of consumption, I'm going to pay that premium no matter what. When I self-insure, now the majority of my plan is things that I can control and I can see, and I'm using cash to pay for most of those things as well. So it just becomes infinitely more efficient if done correctly, which I think is the important caveat there.
Yeah. No, I love the car insurance example. I've heard it. I've not used that one. The way I think of it in my head as a former securities advisor is always in securities and retirement savings and that kind of stuff. I always think of it as, with what you're trying to do with a healthcare plan, you're trying to create predictability, sustainability, affordability, right? So I always think of it as trying to retire either on a savings account, which would kind of be your fully funded, versus a 401k, right? So if you put all your money in a savings account, you're going to get 0.5%, 1%. It's going to be safe. It's going to be, there's nothing to worry about. There's no loss. There's no concern. But you're not going to be able to build a sustainable retirement. Whereas some people think of, the stock market as risky. Maybe, but the 401k creates a structure for people to invest that in a diversified way that mitigates that risk, but also gives them a retirement. Like American workers are not going to be able to create a retirement off a savings account, right? And I very much view like a fully funded and like the profitability, sustainability of a healthcare plan in a corporation the same way. You're not going to be able to do that in a savings account. You're going to have a 401k to structure that allows you to make those choices.
Yeah, and I think to extend that analogy, because I've heard it applied to captives, Donovan, the diversification of a portfolio for people that are actively investing and as knowledgeable as you are, I'm going to pick some sort of mutual fund, exchange traded funds. I'm going to blend a portfolio that on average over time, it's going to make me more money than if I were individually picking stocks. I think a captive allows you to do that because you diversify the portfolio of employers and their risk pool as well. And you should have more predictable outcomes as a result of that.
Yeah, I love it. So let's talk about your videos and kind of your online presence. So you talked about those videos you started with 5 years ago, which is crazy because I remember watching those. And I want to say it seems like it was longer than 5 years ago just because
it was 2020, July.
Yeah, just the transition of like our business and like where we were back then and like where we are now, it seems like it was a lifetime ago. But those videos and also your new ones, I actually play them for my team now, the new series that you're doing. And then at the end of a team meeting, we'll watch those videos. They're short, they're like 5 minutes. But what it does is it engages my team in conversation on, this last week we did one on lasers and we were talking about lasers on renewals we just did, and why did we do that? Why did we choose it? What were our options? How did that laser work? And it's been a great kind of conversational tool to like give everybody on the team kind of that level of education, understanding with how we're making decisions on the top end.
Well, I did them originally, Donovan, because that something like that didn't exist, at least what I could find. And me learning the world of stop loss insurance on my own within an organization, it was Sun Life, where I really was taught stop loss. I had to go ask questions. I heard the term darkened doorways sometimes. You just pick other people's brains to pick up elements of it over time. And I realized there was a void, if you will, of really formal, I would say conceptual and chronological education on the subject. And so I just thought, hey, let's produce these. Maybe people are interested, maybe they're not. I found out they certainly were. And to your point, the fact that you're showing some of these videos, whether it's the old ones or the new ones, to your team, just proves to me the idea is that nobody else is doing that. So if you just find your niche that you know well and you give freely information or the expertise that you might have, the market will be receptive to that. And so that has led me down a path, man. I don't know how many videos we're up to now, but we're probably across 1 million views on YouTube this year. And it's all related to self-funding and stop loss, as crazy as that sounds. And it just kind of reinforces why we continue to put effort and spend money and time to do it.
Yeah. No, I think it's great. I mean, I remember learning self-funding prior to those videos. Even in 2020, I was using that to show other members on my team. But I remember learning it on my own and going through like CSFS, Certified Self-Funding Specialist. And like the explanations are in there, but they are so, like the answers are so dense that they almost make the understanding of it harder to obtain. And then when you get it, you're like, that's really a simple concept. Like, did you have to go about it in the most complicated way to give you the, like, it's that's simple. Like, I get it, right? But like, we're really bad in the insurance industry.
True mastery is being able to simplify it, right? I mean, so I've done the CSFS myself, man, and I agree with you. Incredibly dense, very ERISA heavy, valuable information, but to your average person who's not as initiated as us in this space, man, it's going to seem overwhelming. And so I think it's incumbent upon folks like you and me that have spent our careers in the space to make it simple and synthesize that information for somebody that's never heard it before. So they walk away somewhat transformed and go, you know what? I need to understand this because this is valuable to my business. So I should lean in. But if we complicate it, man, we're just going to run them away. And then it's actually probably to their detriment that we complicated it too much.
Yeah, agreed. And I mean, I think a lot of that's, I see that on a couple different sides of the business as we're actually out there practicing and working with prospects. To some degree, I see brokers who just talk negatively about solutions because in truth, they don't really understand them. And the same when we're talking to prospects, because the broker negatively said something about a solution without a proper, thorough kind of explanation. What do you see? What do you think's changed since 2020, let's say, as far as broker education and ultimately bringing this education downstream to plan sponsors and effectively like communicating the choices that they have, the
I think our industry is finally caught up to people like to consume information in short form and video form. That's where most of the young Generation Z and maybe the millennial generation respond to. I'm a geriatric millennial, I think technically, so I'm still technically millennial. But that's how I consume information. I want it to be short, digestible. I want to leave with a little bit better understanding of the subject, but I don't necessarily want to read an essay or a white paper or open up a textbook that's 200 pages in order to find out that information. So I think to answer your question directly, we as an industry have just started to adopt the way that other people consume information around real estate or financial services or whatever, and we're finally catching up. And I think it's good for the industry as a whole, which is making employers go, oh, well, that was useful information. I should follow this guy and I should learn more. And then could I do that for my plan? Ultimately, is probably the question we want them to ask. And then what are they going to do, Donovan? If it's you producing the content, and they go, that guy, Donovan or Chelsea, man, I really like what they're having to say. They're the one I associate with the expertise. Let me go hire them to help me do what they're talking about.
Yeah, I imagine that's served you well as you kind of change roles. And
well, has it served you? I have to assume it served you well as well, right?
Yeah. Well, we're getting there. I mean, honestly, from beginning seeing you do it, I'm like, I should do that. I still haven't done it really consistent. There's so much going on.
Well, but think about, I get it, right? There's an effort component to it, and to be consistent over a long period of time is very difficult. If I hadn't hired a producer to help me operationalize it, I probably would have quit. But the reality is seeing the fruition of doing it for a long enough period of time, now it's to such a point where I can't stop doing it, because it really want to be a disservice to my career, but I think it would be a disservice to the marketplace who is desperate for this information. And if I'm the one that helps deliver it, cool. If it's somebody else like you or Chris Hamilton or you name a person, great. We all have our own lanes where we're slightly different at what we understand and what we know and the way that we communicate it. But I do think it's important that we continue to do it. Otherwise, somebody else will fill the void, right? And somebody else might get the benefit of doing that.
So on your end, you're really, I imagine the majority of the consumers of your content are on our side of the business, but of course they're opening their eyes up downstream to all the solutions. Because on your podcast, I mean, you've had just about everybody on that's doing something interesting that's changing the industry, new solutions, like just amazing guests.
Well, you would think it. I do believe. I don't get like deep demographic detail, but I do believe obviously it's a lot of consultants. But it's funny. I'll show up to employer events where we're educating employers, and I'll have an HR person come up to me and say, "You know what? I've been watching your podcast for years," and it's really weird because I don't quite know how it ends up landing in their inbox or on their feed. But ultimately, there's actually a lot of employers, and I'm sure you suspect this, which is why you're doing what you're doing. There's a lot of employers that really want to know this stuff, and they don't know where to get it.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think the content and the education needs to be brought downstream, devoid of the acronyms and the complexities, and kind of brought forth in a straight up way, and also examples of case studies and application pros and cons of everything. Because it's just, I just hear all too often like this doesn't work, that doesn't work. It's like it's kind of ridiculous.
Well, how often have you heard, "Oh, we were self-funded 20 years ago and it didn't work, I'll never do it again"? Do you hear that quite a bit?
Yeah, I lost a case in like February because of it. And I was like, not only did we had a stop loss renewal, and then with a cap next year, I was like, not only is it cheaper this year, worst case scenario, if everything went terrible. If everything went terrible again following year, it's still cheaper. And I could probably get a renewal to where the following year it would still be cheaper. Worst case scenario, all things gone wrong. So it's like at some point you have to look at it like the stock market. You can't be like, your grandmother that says that's risky, don't ever do that. It's like, well, we have to kind of design a way around that and create some sustainability, some predictability in that too.
Well, and I think it's for you, right? It's helping differentiate as a really true trusted advisor and a consultant versus what maybe the experience they had with what you might call a broker in the past. There is a spectrum of abilities on both sides of the equation here. And it's really important for an employer to find a trusted advisor that they believe, one, knows what they're doing, but two, that they're actually bringing solutions to the table that are going to benefit them and not necessarily what's best for the consultant financially, which is always, I think the risk is the lack of trust comes around. Well, I've got burned because somebody brought me this recommendation. And then I found out, well, they were incentivized financially to bring it to me. And so do they really have my best interests in mind, or are they doing what's best for their business? I think that's created a little bit of, what's the word? They're incredulous about who's actually advising them and why.
So broker versus consultant, what's your quick take or simple explanation when you're talking to a plan sponsor? And because like it's a delicate balance. Like for one, they know, like, and trust their current broker, right? And they should, right? Sure, that person's not intentionally doing the wrong thing, but at the same time, I always try to like communicate to them, like, they may be good, they may be nice, but like you wouldn't hire an employee and incentivize them for the opposite behavior that you're looking to get at them. And your current arrangement just doesn't allow for that. But what's your kind of take or explanation when you're sitting down with a plan sponsor about that?
I mean, the easiest way to think about it is a broker shops insurance, a consultant collects information and brings solutions to the table. And that's really the easiest way to think about it. And there's nothing wrong with a broker. If you're a 7-life group, you hire a broker to shop Blue Cross or United Healthcare, that's what you're going to get. And that's what you probably, there's a point though, where a consultant, somebody that's really digging into the data and bringing ideas, but also listening to you as an employer, your own needs, what your specific goals are, and doesn't just throw, well, I know what to do for you, here it is. You're going to have to obviously make sure you're listening to them. But a consultant at this point, and I think the industry is demanding the transition from broker to consultant, because if you see what's happening in the fully insured market right now, and I'm sure you see it in your locale as well, it's somewhat of a bloodbath. And I think we're at a point where most employers have reached their breaking point in terms of being able to continue to do what they're doing over and over again, where now they're going to need a consultant instead of a broker at the state of healthcare today.
Yeah. I think one of the simple tests, and one of the things I always kind of mention, and again, this is coming from, being a financial advisor, but the one thing I've never, ever seen sitting with a prospect is any broker materials that showed their historical performance in the plan, right? Like, have you ever seen that where you sit down and like the first page of the renewal is the past 5 years and the premium and the enrollment and the PEPY? Like, I still have never seen it. And that's something we do every single time. And I think that's like the number one thing. It's like they're brokering a different risk transfer year by year by year by year without the consulting aspect of like, hey, let's look at how this has been performing to figure out how fast you need to fix it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think 5-year look backs are always important. And especially, let's say you got hired, you implemented whatever your strategy was on their behalf. You should be looking at over a 3 to 5 year horizon to say, are we delivering the value that we suggested we'd be able to do so? To me, that's really the proof. And we are in the risk business, so there are certain things outside of everybody's control, which I have to accept, and I'm sure you do as well. But the averages, the overall performance, even if there's a blip one single year over that 5 years, if you're still on a more sustainable trajectory, you flattened or lowered that curve, that is proof that the strategy is working. You're not going to be able to prove that necessarily in a single 12-month period all the time.
Yeah, for sure. So let's talk about captives and start from the beginning. You know, captives are a funny thing because they're all different and they all operate very different. Some of them have proprietary stacks where you're essentially buying a healthcare plan and stop loss and captive. Some of them are just captive. Some of them run separate corporations, different plan years, like all kinds of different things. But let's start from the beginning. What is a captive?
Well, so I'll give you the short answer and then I'll give you an analogy because, again, we want to try to keep it simple. But the short answer, it's a community of like-minded employers that band together to get scale that they may not have on their own. And that scale gives more predictability year after year on the renewals, as well as the stacks that you described, the cost containment stacks. And they're all different by benefits captive or group captive. But I think of a captive, like if you've ever been bowling, which I'm sure you've been bowling before, I'm a pretty average bowler. So sometimes I get a few pins, sometimes a strike, sometimes it's a gutter ball. What a captive does is bring those bumpers on the side where it doesn't still guarantee a strike, but it's going to prevent you from rolling a gutter ball in any single year. Think of a captive as your bumpers on the side of a bowl.
I like that. That makes sense.
You can write it down if you think it's good enough. I keep trying analogies, man. You never know, but I feel like the bowling one, everybody's been bowling and it works because it's hard for us, man. And it's hard for you, I'm sure. You're coming in with this thing that's complex. And if I were to whiteboard layers and all this stuff in front of you, it'd go in one ear and out the other, and you go, that sounds too complicated. I can't do it. But if you really help them build a story and the framework of what it is for and why it benefits them to look at one, then they're going to lean in and they'll get into the technical stuff as needed. So we really have to be better storytellers ultimately, depending on where we sit, because the story is what's going to compel them to listen.
So, you know, stop loss renewals are 12 months at a time. And the way I always kind of think of it is your captive is, you know, covering those in-betweens for the plan years to make sure you're not blowing up on any particular renewal for conditions. So let's talk about that. What kind of things might happen that cause issues, conditions, different things you've seen that can cause a stop loss policy to renews substantially, I guess.
Yeah. Then there's a number of things. If you follow Sun Life or HCC, there's a number of great reports out there on their blocks of business. And almost always cancer is the number one category in terms of frequency of high cost. You hear gene therapy a lot, but gene therapy, quite frankly, is so infrequent that I don't think it's materialized in such a big category today. But the random ones, man, are really the most costly ones. Like NICU babies are by far the biggest price tags that I see year after year. Again, infrequent to a degree, but when they are on a plan, these can be multi-million dollar claims. And so I think an employer just has to think about stop loss in a bucket. It's going to be a relatively small percentage, a minority share of their plan. What contractual protections are you buying in the event that something goes really, really wrong? And then your majority of your focus should be on the 60 or 70% of your plan that's actual claims. Because if you do a good job controlling those, not only are you going to lower your overall plan costs, but your stop loss should follow suit. So buy protection for worst case scenarios, but then focus on the controllable items, which is your claims management itself.
Right. So I think one of the things I've seen with captives, maybe a better way to ask this is plan sponsor currently fully funded. Um, Maybe they've started to look back 5 years and realizing, wow, I have, double digit average trend here, and it's not sustainable going 5 years forward. Is typically something we look at and try to have that conversation with them. But what do you think are the starting points conceptually and maybe cost containment solutions as a starting point? Because you seem to be of a similar mind. Like, this isn't a annual reactive thing. This needs to be a 3 to 5 year business plan going forward. I think of it as an individual business unit within that business, usually being the second or third highest cost. What's the starting point for you, either conceptually or taking action?
Well, so conceptually is some of the things we described before, right? Is really being in the driver's seat and not be subject to a system that's designed to allow costs to go up over time and actually is incentivized to allow them to go up. But then I would dig into pharmacy, Donovan, and I'd love your opinion here as well. But I think the pharmacy contracts, especially if they're fully funded, if they realize how much they're spending on pharmacy, how little to none of the rebates are coming back into their own pocket, how those claims are then being utilized as the pretense for your increases as well. If you start with your pharmacy contract, chances are there's 35, 40% savings on your pharmacy from day one with almost none or little to no disruption whatsoever to the employee. So that's where I would start. So I'd be curious to hear you comment on that piece.
No, I agree. Pharmacy is the easiest place to start. There's almost no disruption at all. And if there is, it's usually for a logical clinical reason that we don't understand. But we can certainly explain it with the PBM. I think the number one step that we usually have to transition people to, maybe even before we can fix that, depending on where they're at, is just data acquisition, right? Sometimes clients get put into a place where they're fully funded in a state that releases like an MLR in one page of data. And when they're also pushing high renewals, to some degree, if we're looking for alternative stop loss quotes, like those stop loss carriers have to take shadow underwriting into consideration, to where they're almost taking the assumption that these carriers are doing, and then they're trying to do, an AI or a PBM database checklist. So certainly, I think, if a plan sponsor gets put in that situation and they're not able to fix the PBM, at the very least, that solution should have full data acquisition. And we've been able to work with, the carriers on plans where they typically don't want to do it. We've been able to export raw data files to our own analytics. So then we're completely freed up to start the following year.
Yeah, I mean, you finally get a look under the hood, right? Until you take the step of being self-funded, you won't get the depth of data that you're looking for to actually make strategic decisions. And so sometimes it does have to be a little bit of a leap of faith, where now you have a spectrum of possible outcomes because there's variability in being self-insured. And if the worst case scenario in self-insured is a palatable distance away from what you're guaranteed to get today, being fully insured, but on the other side of that is a richness of data that's now going to inform better decisions over time, you have to be able to take somewhat of a leap of faith. Shadow pricing happens, AI tools are out there, but there is no perfect way to move a group from fully insured to self-funded if they don't have any data at all. And this is where the employer really needs to understand the why behind they're doing what they're doing and be able to accept a little bit more risk as a result of that.
Yeah. I think that's really one of the first questions that a plan sponsor should be asking when they're kind of getting to this point where they're realizing hey, this isn't working. We're just reactively, I always call it they're moving to another carrier to do the same thing somewhere else. Fundamentally, they didn't address any of the claim issues, which I don't know about you, but I didn't realize for a long time that I really had to explain what a claim is. Have you experienced that at all?
Maybe that level of simplicity, but maybe it's a unfair presumption that I have that people understand what claims actually are. But maybe that's actually the reason why we're in this predicament, is a lot of employers don't even understand that component. So do you see that regularly?
Yeah. Let me tell you what I mean. So
Yeah. Okay.
when you and I are talking claims, we understand that we're talking about a dollar amount requested for a covered incident,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
When you're talking to a company and you say reducing claims, what I found, or my perception of this a few times at least, has been they're thinking medical conditions. So they're thinking of their population, and they're thinking we need to reduce medical conditions, which is obviously not the goal at all. Like, we're talking about the supply chain, the request for dollars, fair reimbursement prices, all that kind of stuff. And sometimes what they're hearing is like, we're trying to change what their people are doing, where they're going, how much care they're getting them healthy. It's like, that's not the name of the game. We're fixing the back end.
Yeah. Well, that makes sense, man. And what it really is paying fairly for the services provided. And you don't know whether you're doing that right now when you're fully funded. But I think there's also a misconception, Donovan, that to lower costs, you have to make the plan worse, or you have to impede care or disrupt access. And that's absolutely the opposite of the truth.
Yeah, that's a really great point. And I find that's something that we have to like actually state, because they're coming off at least like a 20-year history of any time they get a high renewal and they need to make the plan cheaper for the company, they have to take something away from the employees. They have to add more deductible. They have to put them in a tighter network. They have to increase their premiums. And that is a starting point that always, like, we have to stop and explain it. Like, fundamentally, if this is going to work for the plan at the end of the year, it's because it worked for the employees first. Like, it was a good result for them, and they wanted it, and they did it that way, and they got, cheaper drugs, no-cost drugs from international sourcing. Maybe we did green imaging, and they got free advanced imaging, right? Like, all these solutions, they work for them, and then at the end of the year, they work for the plan.
Well, yeah, I mean, we're at a state where the average, I think, family premium somewhere in the neighborhood of $25,000 to $26,000 annually. And we've gotten to that point because I think we've made it difficult for employees to actually access care when they need it because of the financial constraints. And so therefore, what happens? They delay care, they don't get care at all, and then something terrible actually materializes. Then they're forced to go get care. Then it's really expensive for the employer and the employee too, because now they're forced to pay maximum out of pockets and all those things. If they had just made it easier to go get the routine care or the early onset care they needed, because they're removing financial constraints or removing deductibles and co-pays and for insurance, it's actually better for the plan. And obviously it's better for the member as well. So we have to retrain employers to stop thinking consumerism is cost shifting to the employees and giving them more skin in the game. The more skin in the game is actually much more expensive for everyone. At least in my humble opinion.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I mean, I find so often, like, there's so many conceptual things that you have to try to shift them away from, just because when you're in a fully funded model, like, there is no opportunities to make these kinds of decisions. So the only lever to pull is give employees more skin in the game.
Yeah. Again, because it's all insurance, it's all premium. What we're really talking about, you mentioned green imaging. That's an excellent example. Direct contract for images, MRIs, things like that, where people actually are incentivized. And I'm sure in that situation, the out-of-pocket's completely waived if they just go here instead of here. Or sometimes the facility is exactly the same one they would have gone to anyways. They just have a better contract in order to access it. Well, that is really simple. That employee now will go get that MRI there. It costs them nothing. And it's probably a third or a fourth of the cost it would have been had they used the insurance reimbursement model instead. But people don't necessarily understand you can disentangle or separate insurance from access. And they think Blue Cross logo, United Healthcare logo, whatever it may be, equals access. And it's actually more of an impediment to access. And again, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I agree. The other thing is, like, a lot of those programs come with so much assistance in healthcare delivery. Like, that's a complicated and confusing process to figure out where you're going to get advanced imaging. So having these types of programs are often such a huge assist to employees from an advocacy point of view, to say, well, here, there's a center 3 miles from your house. Here's a voucher. That's all you need. You're good. Right? Instead of making an appointment at the hospital and going into a hospital, which no one ever wants to do. just to empty out your checking account.
And get back to pharmacy for a second. You mentioned international sourcing as a way to procure drugs through like Canada for a fraction of the cost we might pay in the States. The other things, there's things like biosimilars that exist where Stelara might cost $120,000 a year. There's a biosimilar for the employee if they choose to take it, and then obviously the physician will need to make sure that's approved. But that biosimilar could be $6,000 a year. So you have one person on one drug that could get a biosimilar and save the plan 6 figures a year as a result. But they may not have ever been offered that before. They may have no idea that actually exists. And so till you find a partner that knows that information, has the network or the framework set up to be able to make that transition, they're going to be stuck. The employee doesn't know that I'm taking a $100,000 a year drug. They know what their copay is, and that's all they know. And so they go, well, it costs $20 a month or whatever the case may be. Why do I care? Well, it's costing your employer $120,000 a year. And by the way, when the renewal comes in and your contributions go up, do you realize there's actually an association between those two things? And people will go, why are my contributions going up? Well, the reality is there's a handful of people that probably to no fault of their own are costing the plan a significant amount of money. And until you know that and can address it, it's going to continue to be a problem.
Yeah, I had a client on stage and we did kind of like a review of his plan after 3 years. We had this talk and it was great. One of the things he always told me, he's like, when we started doing this plan and you're explaining everything, he's like, you kind of made it like it operates just like the plan you're used to, right? And I think you have to some degree because it's hard. He's like, that's not how it works at all. He's like, it works way better. I'm like, I know, but like, nobody's going to believe that. And hey, it works better and it's cheaper for you and it's cheaper for the employee. I was like, I have to like start from somewhere or you're going to blow me out the door thinking I'm crazy. So I have to tell you like, hey, all the functions, like here's how your plan operates. There's these 4 parts. You're going to have all those same 4 parts. We're just going to measure them independently. And that way we can push each one for performance where we need it. And if we have problems, we can swap out one and not disrupt the employees. But I almost feel like you have to start from a point of like, hey, operationally, this is the exact same thing. We're just going to make it make sense for you.
Exactly. Well, I think you also have to accept that you have to meet employers where they are in this quote unquote journey, right? I mean, I'm sure there's incredibly innovative things that you want to do with every single client that you end up picking up. The reality is most of them are probably not going to be ready in year 1 to do those things. So you say, okay, here's where we're trying to go. My job is to get you there if you're open to it. But today, maybe we keep it as at least disruptive as possible to your employees. You get comfortable with the idea of being self-funded in the first place. Next year, maybe we talk about adding this thing or moving to a narrow network or a high performance structure or whatever it may be, and we'll increment you over time. We get criticism, at least for us at Pareto, because we're pretty flexible in what we allow. Meaning TPA, network design, PBMs. We have incentives for things that we think work exceedingly well, but we don't require them to do all of those things from day one because we recognize that most employers are not ready to cut the cord completely and go all in. That's a rare type of an employer, actually. And so you have to work them there over time and accept that not everybody's going to do exactly what you believe is optimal. And that's also okay because at least they're doing 70% or 80% of what you might want them to do.
No, I agree. And I've certainly, in the past many years back, pushed a client to go all the way with all the responsible cost containment solutions. And I mean, they worked financially, but they just weren't ready to hear the disruption from employees. And they weren't, willing to kind of be upfront with communications, all that kind of stuff. So we've learned like financially, I can know this is the best thing. And we just lay out those educational pieces now. When they're ready for it, they take it. We start much slower than we used to.
Yeah, I mean, they have businesses to run, man. They're in the healthcare business, whether they like it or not, but that's not their core business. And so they have a business to run, employees to think about. And so you can show them a way to save 40% on their healthcare spend in year 1. That doesn't mean it's actually going to be received well by the population. And then does it disrupt their actual business, their core business that they're doing? And if so, maybe that's not the right recommendation at this time.
Yeah, I agree.
You're smiling. I feel like you've been there a couple times.
Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, I've been there. It was about 5 years ago, one or two of them. So going back to plan sponsors, just to kind of close this out from a conceptual point of view, plan sponsors going up for renewal. Three things that they should do different, or ask their broker to do different, or question during this renewal process as they come to their breaking point.
So fully insured plan sponsor or self-insured?
Let's say either. Let's just say either conceptually how they're doing the process, what they're asking for, what's being measured, what steps to take. What are your kind of three things that they should be taking into consideration?
Well, I think the first I'd ask is, why are you bringing me these particular solutions? I think that's the fundamental motivation behind what a broker is providing as recommendations. I'd like to understand the why. The second thing I'd ask, which I know some people are uncomfortable asking, is how are you getting paid in this structure? So where are you getting paid and how often are you getting paid? I think is another maybe uncomfortable question to ask, but a very important question for plan sponsors to ask, because then that might suggest where the incentives actually lie. And that's really going to perhaps strain the trust. But if you have nothing perhaps to hide, or you're very transparent as a broker, you should be fine answering that question. And I think the last one is, what is the long-term strategy? You brought me these ideas today. What is it getting me to over time? Why are we doing this now? And what is it setting me up for in the future? Because this myopic thinking of 12-month purchasing of healthcare is a big reason why I think we're in this predicament. And if you don't have a long-term strategy, I think ultimately you're going to get suboptimal outcomes as a result.
I agree. I love those. I would say the funny thing is like your broker knows how much everybody in your organization gets paid. And you hired them, and often you don't know how, when, or why they would get paid more or less.
Well, it's not to suggest they shouldn't. And your skill set, or people like you, your skill set is very valuable in the market, and you should be compensated fairly for that. But knowing how you get paid and what you get paid is, I think, an easy question to be able to answer if you're not trying to hide it.
Yeah. So, the CAA, this is part of the CAA, but I find that nobody's doing it correctly. So if they're getting a compensation disclosure, it's after the fact. It still has fine print. It still has wide ranges of bonuses, right? So I always say, like, hey, if you had a renewal spreadsheet, that should be bottom line. What is the broker compensation on carrier A, carrier B, carrier C, right there as you're making the decision? So it's upfront, it's clear, everybody's on the same page.
And if there's a difference, just explain the difference. Why is it a little bit higher here? And I'm sure there's an easy justification for that as well. Yeah.
Yeah, and sometimes it is. Like, I know for us, like, depending on how big our scope of work is, like, more scope might mean more compensation, but that needs to be out there in a conversation for the employers to have. Closing thought on captives, exploration, understanding, or Pareto.
Well, I'm going to close on something you probably heard before, but I don't know the audience has heard before. I remember we talked about the acronym. We're trying to avoid acronyms, but POSIWID is one of my favorite acronyms. And what it stands for is the purpose of the system is what it does. And what that means is whatever outcomes you're getting, that's why the system exists. And so if you're in this world of fully unfunded, what are the outcomes you're getting? Rising costs and often worsening plan designs year after year after year. So you have to accept as an employer, that's what that system does. And if you don't like those outcomes, then you have to decide, am I ready for a different system or a different model that will deliver the outcomes I'm looking for? And I think most employers are at that fork in the road right now, and they've just got to be willing to lean into something new.
Yeah. No, you told me that. I've used it so many times since.
Good.
I recorded 2 podcasts this week on other people's shows, and I've used it. I used it both times. So it's part of my conversation flow with this now, because when you're going through it and they're starting to have questions, like the rebuttal thought or whatever is like, well, doesn't my insurance carrier want to keep the premium low to keep me as a client, right? Like, well, doesn't my commission broker want to keep it? Well, has it been working?
Yeah. Is it working? I mean, that's a simple question. If it's not working, then you're in the wrong system.
Either it's been failing for 10, 20 years and they're really bad at doing that, or it's just not the purpose of it at all.
That's not the purpose of it, man. Well, I'm glad, I'm flattered. I obviously didn't come up with POSIWID, but I feel like its application to the healthcare model in this $4.5 trillion sector that we operate in, I think it couldn't be more true. And so fire away, man. And I hope everybody that listens to this might actually find it valuable as well.
Awesome, man. Spencer, thanks for joining me today. I really appreciate it. Thanks for sharing all your knowledge with the audience.
Thanks for the invite, man. Appreciate it.